Good evening, everyone. My name is David Simmons-Wood. I'm the Programs Director for Early Music America, and we want to welcome you to this evening's first of our webinar series for Winter-Spring here in 2023 from Early Music America. We have a wonderful conversation coming up this evening. And we also want to make sure that you know that coming up in February, on Saturday, February the 18th at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, we'll have Catherine Cook, who will be joining us from the Royal Conservatory, The Hague, with a couple of her graduate students to talk about some recent studies in applied artistic research. That'll be our next webinar, and that'll be broadcast once again here on Facebook and on YouTube. And we want to make sure that you know that our first in-person summit for Early Music America is coming up this October in Boston. We're also currently accepting presentation proposals and applications for the Emerging Artist Showcase, which will be featured at the summit this year, among many others. So you can go to earlymusicamerica.org/summit to find out more about the summit and how to apply for those. And you can always, at our website, find out more about our webinar series, our magazine, sign up for our newsletter, e-notes, and find the latest in news and reviews from early music, and many, many other resources there on our website, earlymusicamerica.org. And of course, we couldn't do this without the support of all of our members. And if you'd like to continue this kind of programming from Early Music America, please consider becoming a member at earlymusicamerica.org. So I'd like to introduce our host for this evening, who is one of the co-chairs of our IDEA Task Force. That's the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access Task Force for Early Music America. And that is Karin Cuéllar Rendón. And thank you so much, Karin, for being here this evening and kind of continuing a conversation that began in the podcast that the IDEA Task Force launched last year. So thank you so much for hosting this evening, and we're really looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, David. I want to welcome everyone to Increasing Diversity in the Early Music Field by Fostering Access in Music Education, the first of EMA's 2023 webinar series. These presentations, workshops, and conversations are offered free of charge and stem from the conversations that began during the 2022 EMA Virtual Summit and what we just heard from David, the Now We Listen podcast produced by the Early Music America IDEA Task Force. Before we start, I want to recognize that we are visitors to the traditional territories of various indigenous peoples. Tonight, I'm connecting from Santa Cruz de la Sierra, Bolivia, the unceded territory of the Chiquitano, Ayoreode, Guarani, Mojeño, y Yuracare nations. Today and always, we recognize that our colonial histories have shaped the ways we interact with the lands and waters, and with the indigenous peoples who are their past, current, and future caretakers. Relevant to today's conversation, we also acknowledge that our colonial histories and legacies have shaped and molded the educational systems of which we are currently part of. And we encourage you all to think in ways to reshape these systems in order to reinstate equity and access for all. Tonight, the conversation will center around the themes of representation, sense of belonging, and identity and empowerment. And we have the pleasure of having as guests tonight Sallynee Amawat, a Baroque violinist who is known as a soloist, orchestral, and chamber musician throughout the US, Canada, and Asia. After finishing her doctoral studies at McGill University in 2016, her work has focused on championing historical women composers and performers and exploring intercultural encounters in early music. In 2022, her ensemble Infusion Baroque released their newest album entitled Virtuosa, an exploration of works composed or performed by women ranging from the 17th to 21st centuries. In 2021, she also produced and directed a performance film entitled Matchanu, combining music of the French Baroque and Thai classical mask dance. Currently based in Montreal, Sallynee performs with ensembles such as the Arion Baroque Orchestra, Studio de Musique Ancienne de Montréal, Les Boréades, and Clavecin and Concert, and also serves on the board of directors of Early Music America. Welcome, Sallynee.
Thank you so much for having me.
We also have the pleasure of having Kyran Assing with us tonight, a Trinidadian cellist and gambist who is based in Montreal, where he regularly performs and maintains a private studio of students. A recipient of multiple full scholarships and awards, Kyran completed his undergrad degree at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver and a master's in early music performance at McGill University under the mentorship of Susie Napper. Present projects include research into early Afro-American music performances with Canada's premier orchestra for musicians of color, ensemble of Viola, consort residencies with Le Voix Humaines, and completing a master's in music education at the University of Quebec in Montreal, focusing on education in underserved communities and neurology. Welcome, Kyran.
Thank you.
Well, I want to start, since we are talking about education and how we can foster access to early music and therefore diversify our field, by asking you, how was your music education experience? What kind of music do you remember learning at the school or in conservatory when you were a child, or when you, and as you were growing up? And what ultimately led you to decide to follow a professional career? Sallynee.
So my path to a professional, being a professional musician, is a little bit unconventional. I started violin when I was very young, and music lessons were a big part of my childhood growing up in the US. But when I was 18, I moved to Bangkok, Thailand, with my family. And there I began university, but not in music. I started as an engineering major. And then finally, I moved over to business administration. But the whole time that I was in university, I also was a freelancer musician as well, doing mostly orchestral and chamber music in the Bangkok music scene. So I had sort of this professional experience before I had musical training or education sort of beyond my high school years. And after I graduated from university, I continued to freelance and perform, but I also joined the faculty of an international school in Bangkok called International School Bangkok, where I was a string ensemble teacher for grades 3 through 12. I taught there for several years, and at some point I felt like I wanted to continue with my studies, and just come back to the States to further my education, but also to just for a change of pace. So I came back to the US to pursue a master's degree in performance and pedagogy, and it was in between my first and second year of my master's that I discovered early music, and just sort of fell in love, and then the rest is history. But I do remember as a child, I was a Suzuki student. And so, the Suzuki, I'm sure many people are familiar with this particular pedagogical system. And it has a very set sort of repertoire that is actually really quite wonderful, because it's something where, students from all over the world can come together and play together. And in my graduate studies, of course, being an early music specialist, I mean, we also deal with a very particular repertoire as well. So I think that it was a combination of sort of like being in these very, very particular environments that really shaped my musical career. But I think one sort of eye-opening experience that I had, more in retrospect than when I was actually living it, was teaching music at an international school. And it was the first time that I was sort of participating in, and also learning myself, a curriculum that was really devoted to various cultures. So the philosophy of this particular school that I was at was to was to nurture a global citizen. And so in my teaching there, as well as those of my colleagues who were teaching more general music, the curriculum did cover several different types of music, folk music, classical music, as well as traditional music. So my experience sort of being moving away from that and now very firmly based in North America, I feel a little bit far apart from that sort of approach of teaching music as a global citizen.
Thank you, Sallynee. How about you, Kyran? What was your experience?
Well, I started music relatively late. I started with a piano as I was growing up in Trinidad and Tobago when I was at about 10 years old, and then started violin when I was 12. And then my teacher eventually was like, hey, we need a cellist because we want to have a quartet. So I picked up the cello 2 years after that. My experience, it was largely for the cello. It was largely, I had a teacher in the very beginning, but it was mainly teachers who were coming in from New York or from the UK during the summer sessions, and they would just help the orchestra. So I was a part of the National Sinfonia Orchestra of Trinidad and Tobago, which no longer exists. It has become like the National Philharmonic of Trinidad and Tobago. And that's where I really started learning to perform my instrument and the type of music and how I interact with that. So as a normal philharmonic would be, it's that you learn the classical European Western repertoire. So a lot of Bach, a lot of Mussorgsky, Saint-Saëns, etc. But the great thing that I really appreciate as well is that it always had a local flavor. So our instruments, the classical Western European instruments, the cellos, etc., and the full orchestra would always interact with the National Steel Symphony Orchestra, which is the steel pan, so the steel drums, which itself is a full orchestral beast. And when I say a beast, I don't mean that it's just in terms of like loud sound, it's actually very delicate. It's a full on beautiful orchestra with a lot of different tones and colors, but we would also be playing local calypso like Lord Kitchener, etc. We'd also be doing Venezuelan composers because Trinidad is right across there, and we had a huge interaction with El Sistema of Venezuela. A lot of Cuban, Caribbean music, and so it mixed that a lot. And then how I got into doing music professionally, it was that, well, originally in school, I was doing languages and sciences. I was caught between doing neurology or physics. And then, so I got into my university at UBC, and then I just did cello. I ended up there. And I can basically say that's how it happened for my undergrad. And then I moved to Montreal after my time in Vancouver because I spent 5 years there. And it was mainly like to explore the different area of Canada and also to become more involved within the Francophone culture within Canada, within North America, I would say. And I was doing a lot more contemporary music, a lot more experimental things, and then a lot of film music as well. And then I had a very chance happening. Well, I sent an email to Susie Napper being like, hey, I'm kind of interested in doing this because my only experience with the Baroque was like a 3-credit course during my undergrad. I'm like, okay, cool. We're playing 1 and 5. Nice. And then, so I just sent her an email and she's like, oh yeah, sure. Come over. We did some sight reading, had some tea, and then started really going deep into the Baroque, and it's a lot more than 1 and 5. And I was like, okay, this is amazing. And I don't know, I mean, like, life just blossomed after that. And then I always got into like, I always had a bunch of students that I would be teaching because I love that interaction and also sharing the knowledge. And by sharing knowledge, you also learn a lot more about what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing. And it also really allowed me to go really into into the technicalities of music, and then being able to transpose that onto other people who previously have no knowledge of it. And that's why I'm doing another master's in neurology and music education now.
That's so beautiful, Kyran. Thank you so much. I want to keep the conversation going on the things that you are currently doing that focus in tonight's themes. And yeah, I wanted to ask you what current projects or educational programs are you currently part of that are leading work around the idea of representation, sense of belonging and identity and empowerment. Would you like to go, Sallynee or Kyran?
Sure, I can start. So in the last couple of years, through my affiliations with my chamber ensembles, I've been exploring sort of intercultural encounters in early music, with the idea being not necessarily exploring a particular set of historical repertoire, but really exploring the historical approaches to music making that were either share common roots or have different approaches, mostly from the Western approach versus Eastern early music. And another initiative that I've also started fairly recently was to partner with a French Canadian dancer who specializes in traditional Thai dance. And so we've started this new collaboration that brings together Western Baroque music as well as contemporary music and traditional and contemporary Thai and Laotian traditional dance. And so it's really sort of this intersectional crossroads of these various disciplines. And again, sort of exploring the commonalities as well as our differences, and sort of creating almost a new genre from these sort of ancient traditions or ancient approaches. I've also been a guest lecturer this year through a university in Thailand with a course that's geared towards master's and doctoral level students through this Thai university, but the students are in fact based in China. And so the lectures have been based on aesthetics and intercultural approaches to art and performing arts in particular. And that has been actually a very interesting experience and a huge learning experience for me as well, because everyone in the class is coming from a different discipline. So there are students whose backgrounds are in Western music, in traditional music, traditional Southeast Asian music, or traditional Chinese music, or Western classical music performance, education. So it's been just a very interesting mix and a lot of interesting conversations that have come out of it.
How about you, Kyran? I know that you currently teach in a specific program, a very special program in Montreal. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I have multiple. So that's well, within the public schooling system, I recently accepted to work at the École Primaire Île-des-Sœurs, which is a public primary school. And the reason why I accepted to do this is because I'm going to start a project doing historical performance instruments, starting teaching kids to perform on them from the age of 6 onwards. So from ages 6 to 12. It's just the beginning right now because I only started like this January. And why that school is so particularly special is because it's that the students who study in this school, they're largely people of who are underserved in society. So like refugees, recently arrived immigrants, also like lesser economic status people within Montreal society. However, they're absolutely adorable. I love them. I'm teaching 100%. It's exhausting, but they're amazing little kids. I volunteer as well in as a teacher for a lot of different minority group churches in Montreal, largely within the area of Petit Bourgogne. So like with it, which is a historically Black Caribbean area within Montreal, and helping them out with their string programs and general wind programs as well. Even though I'm not a wind player, I can still help with general musicality things. Another project that I'm working on is on Afro-American and Afro-Caribbean historically informed performance, and how the music from the 1600s and from the 1600s to 1800s was constantly alive and is still represented and manifested through our living society. So even how to explain that is that it's all taught by rote, so by ear, and it's constantly passed through the traditions, even though they may not have written sources or even journal reports or anything like that. It's still common elements throughout the Caribbean in performance that's passed through directly from generation to generation, with slight adaptations and cultural influencing of incoming immigrants and different cultural sources. And also like just transposing all of these works into performance for classical European instruments. So primarily viola da gamba, cello, Baroque flutes, and harpsichord.
Thank you. That's so fascinating, Karen. I didn't know about that one, for example. I'm so glad to have learned about that. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing the project that you're leading, which are very crucial to tonight's topic, which is how do we increase diversity in our field. And we came up to this idea that in order to do that, we have to start very early on. So we have to start at the educational level. And the themes of tonight are definitely representation, because if the kids cannot see themselves represented in the people that teaches them or in the repertoire that they are learning, then it's very difficult for them to associate the idea that, yes, I also can do it while they are learning music or learning any other discipline. The other idea, or the other theme for tonight is the sense of belonging and identity. And it goes back to the same thing. If they are not playing the music that represents them or they know, then how are they going to feel that they are part of something as opposed to being left outside? And how all the ways that we can work towards making sure that the kids and youth, they feel empowered to continue into maybe professional careers in music, or maybe not, or maybe just becoming very attentive audience members. So I want to continue asking you, from your experience as educators, what are the shortcomings? Well, let's start with the music curriculums. What are the shortcomings in the music curriculums that we are teaching at schools? How can we decolonize music curriculums taught at schools and make them more inclusive and representative of this global culture that we are trying to be part of, and we are trying to foster, and we are trying to celebrate? Who wants to start? Yeah, Sallynee.
So I think I would like to maybe address this question from the perspective of a private teacher. I've maintained a private studio of violin students for going on 20 years now, and I find that the challenge in diversifying the private studio, for example, is that I think often that the curriculums or the repertoire that we use in our pedagogical approach is very firmly rooted in an approach that is has a long history, and often these these repertoire lists, it's not very flexible, in a sense that in order for it to to be changed or to be diversified, there's a lot of bureaucracy that has to that one has to pass through, and so I think that in light of this, that it often falls upon the shoulders of the teacher to make decisions in what kind of repertoire, what kind of influences to bring into the private studio in particular. And I think that on top of everything, this adds a lot of extra burden to a teacher. And I would love to be able to address this in particular, to provide more resources for all teachers, not just private studio teachers, but also classroom teachers. But I think that maybe access to resources that, in addition to repertoire, but, I know Karin, you and I have talked about, having access to period instruments and all of that. And perhaps that may not be necessary at an early stage, but really kind of addressing these particular issues, coming up with solutions as to how we can support teachers in an educational setting. I think that this to me, I think is what I would like to have as a private teacher, and what I hope that we can focus on.
Thank you, Sallynee. How about you, Karin?
Well, since you spoke about private, I'll talk about public. But again, this is specifically within the context of Montreal and Quebec, which I would say has one of the slightly more advanced educational system when it comes in terms of cultural diversity. Because here we have something called the PFEQ, which is the standards for teaching in Quebec, and it's very listed with the competence and with competences that teachers have to have, but also they also divulge into another one which includes cultural diversity and representation, because Montreal especially is a very diverse city. The issue with it, however, is that even when you're training teachers and for the public school system, is that there's an inherent bias to Western classical music as a standard of achieving. And especially for those of us who came from conservatory training, because it's largely, that's what we learned, that's who we are, that's the very seed from which our knowledge is grown. And so it's okay, so there's that inherent bias, but however, there's also a promotion of different cultural, appreciating different types of cultures and the cultural items that they bring into the Canadian fold. And so, for example, like me, personally, when I made my class plans and etc., I ensured to go into like, because there's a section called appreciation, which you have to do and you have to evaluate it as well. So like I divided that up into like, the different continents, and then every class we're learning of a different composer, like for example, of course, like Villa-Lobos. But not only that, I'll also be going into like Gal Costa or someone who's more modern, and also showing them how the classical style is reflected through that bossa nova, previously pop, and even going into like Lady Gaga, like how is her classical training showing up in her performance, etc., like that. All of that to say, but the major problem as well, I would say, it's not only resources, as you said, it's also time, because within the public school system, we're largely limited to, we're lucky if we get 1 hour per week for each student. Aside from that, as I always tell my students, because they're not only there, but there's also some who take private lessons. And a major difficulty within the education system is that, one, we don't have enough time, and then the second thing is that it's the economic differences between students. Those who can afford to have private lessons are allowed to delve even further into the music, versus those who don't have such an opportunity, who don't have this privilege, are limited to what's happening in the classroom and possibly can't take. They can receive as much as you get, but I'm limited to 1 hour per week for a class of like 20 something students. So the lesson progresses a little slower.
That definitely makes it very difficult. It's true. So then we are talking about a shortcomings in resources, in time, in instruments too. But I want to believe, we do believe that we can use early music as a tool or as a way to maybe cover a little bit those shortcomings, or to approach the students in a way that maybe we can use early music as a way to showing them, a broader spectrum of cultures and their musics as well. So this is my next question. Why early music? How can we use it, and how can it be implemented in a scenario where maybe resources are scarce, like the ones that you have mentioned? And besides the shortcomings that we have mentioned, what are the other challenges that music educators face when trying to foster access to early music at schools? And this is the most important question, what can we gain from fostering access to early music in the public school system or in the private studio system?
So I guess I'll go first. So in terms of the question of why early music, I think that, as we are all specialists in early music, and for our intents for this conversation, I'll use the term historically informed performance. I think all of our work, and in terms of not just education but performance research, we want to expand on the knowledge of what we have of these traditional practices, or early historically informed performance practice, with the hope that this becomes not just knowledge that is restricted to our our local group of colleagues, but to music students in general, to performers of classical music in general. And so I think that for those of us who desire for early music to become, or historically informed performance to become, more mainstream, the idea is to expand its reach and its teachings beyond the conservatory, beyond a very specialized area of training. And in addition to that, I think that the period of history that we're looking at in terms of the repertoire is a period where it comes down to this definition of what is early music. And I know that there have been a lot of conversation in terms of how do we define early music, and should it really be restricted to Western classical music, when in fact early music, historically informed performance, exists across all cultures and their approaches to music. And I think it's it's an opportunity for us to foster the education of young musicians in all kinds of music and all kinds of approaches to music. And in terms of resources and how we would perhaps approach this in a setting that has maybe doesn't have a lot of access to, for example, period instruments or resources in general. I think if we apply just the principles of informed practice, we learn about the history, we learn about the culture. If we can listen to recordings of these early instruments and really understand, the roots of music, not just from Europe, but from, from various cultures around the globe. I think this helps to foster this idea of being global citizens and being part of a multicultural society.
Would you like to comment? Thank you so much, Sallynee. Would you like to comment, Karin?
Yes, for sure. So, the reason why I choose to teach early music and to promote it within the schooling system is because at its very base is that it's very accessible. I'm sorry, like if you have a bunch of like 6-year-olds, it's very hard for them to sit through a 45-minute Rachmaninoff symphony. It- In terms of neurology, attention span, keep it short, keep it spontaneous, beautiful. And that's why I promote that. And also, as you're saying, Sunny, it's the that early music traditions existed not only within the European sphere, and one of the things looping into resources as well that I wish we can do a bit more of within the early music community is collaboration, not only amongst early music peers, but with world music peers as well, because if anything, and this might be a little controversial, it's that they're actually living their historical practices versus us trying to reinterpret what we read, etc. So I think there's a lot of knowledge transference that can happen there, and doing collaborations with other people, incorporating it into schools and how these cultures represent themselves. And as you're also saying, within a more multicultural society, there's nothing better for tolerance and understanding than being deeply intrinsically involved within a cultural process. There's no way of appreciating as much. Sure, you can go listen to a concert, but if you as a young kid go into this early music world and listen to it, and okay, you're intrinsically involved, very much involved in the creation process and all of the intricacies that are necessary to create this production, you have much more appreciation of it, not only as early music, but also world music as well, again. And in general, it's just that for me, on a purely emotional level as well, is that what attracts me to early music in terms of the European classical sense is the rhetoric and the emotion that's in it. And that was something that I found was missing from my experience with orchestral repertoire previously in terms of romantic music, the modern way of playing romantic music. But it's just a way of like allowing yourself to delve into your emotions, your thought process, and deliberately deciding on completing something in a particular way and manner, and also how that affects your psychology and your sociability with others.
Thank you so much, Kyran. So what I take from this is that even given very scarce resources, there are many ways that we can foster this access to early music, expose the students to early music, by showing them a video on YouTube, maybe ideally bringing them as a 1-year excursion to a concert. But at the same time, I think that there must be some responsibility also from the part of ensembles. So then we could have this network of ensembles, early music ensembles, who are willing to come to schools to give demonstrations and to do the extra work, or walk the extra mile. So then the access is happening from both ends, the ones that need it and are seeking for it, and the ones that are actually giving it. And so this is the part that I wish it would be part of our current dynamics within the early music field, in which we are all connected, and it's not just we not only make music for beauty, or for this idea of the excellence, but we also find a way to use music as a tool to reach communities and to show that early music can be very can be very open. So then we can actually learn so many things through it and reach the communities and youth and children. So with this, I want to lead to that would be my my wish. What would be your wishes or your dreams for the future of early music with regards with education? How about you, Sallynee?
I think that my vision, or my ideal vision for the future of early music education, and ultimately the early music field as a whole, is if we can foster younger musicians that have an interest and a passion for early music and historically informed performance. Starting from the very early stages of their certainly ensemble playing, but perhaps even earlier, that this would eventually, in 10 years time, 20 years time, we would start to see the results of this on stages as well. There's been so many conversations about diversifying the early music field on stage, and I think that becomes I think that approaching this this challenge, or this wanting to see change in this particular part of our field, should begin from the roots, from the ground up. And so I feel that's where one of the important aspects of fostering historically informed performance in education has its benefit.
Thank you. How about you, Kyran?
Yeah, my dream is almost like, it's very similar actually. It's largely so that we start teaching historically informed performance from the get-go, instead of having because presently, I think you alluded to it earlier in the very beginning, where that early music is very much something that you get into very much later on in your career or within your university education. There aren't really much. There isn't there. There are not many opportunities for as you're growing as a developing musician, as an adolescent, teenager, even young kid, to really start immediately training on rhetorical performance or on historical technique, or even just having access to instruments. And that creates, as I always said before, it creates a kind of an elite circle within an elite circle, and really bringing that down to earth, to allow a lot more people to have access to that. And also diversifying the stage. I want it to just become normal. Like, when I get on a stage, I don't want to have a comment at the end being like, "Oh, you're the black cellist." I'm like, "Oh, yes." That can stop at a point. But and also what you said before, Karin, about the okay, let me see how I can explain this. It's about the performers doing their parts within the schooling system. Um the thing is that there's the three pillars within the cultural community for music, which is which are the educators, cultural mediators, and the performers. And the tasks are not interchangeable, but they interact a lot. And something that I would like to do is also like get a lot more performers to be coming into school. But of course, if it's a public school, the issue is, once again, economics. Funds are a major, like, I've had this discussion a lot of times also with you, Karin. Economics is always a major burden when we're talking about accessibility to early music, and it's an issue that people seem to want to just put in the corner. Um, and the thing is, if we actually want to do something, we literally need to put our money where our mouth is. And yeah, saying that because a lot of the times, even performers, some would do pro bono, but then, of course, you want to give them appropriate recompense. But in the public schooling system, you may not have the funds.
Thank you, Karen. I think you touched the neuralgic point, which is access. But maybe the schools don't have the funds, but maybe ensembles can include those, include their budget, this little corner of accessibility. Why not offer free tickets, for every concert, a certain amount of tickets for communities underserved? And so then it becomes a culture, so then we all we all, the ones that are able to pay for these tickets, we are also, you know, being able to pay for our brothers, sisters, and neighbors that may not be able to pay for these tickets. So then that's part of my wish, you know, that so then ensembles also take into their, so they take their responsibility that access won't just happen by itself. You know, we all have to work in a network. So then we can actually help, and help that is actually tangible. Like, you know, this is one example, just having always a certain amount of free tickets for underserved communities, and or, you know, coming up with projects or repertoires that represent these communities and inviting them to the concert stage, or bringing the concerts out of the concert hall into their communities. You know, how it doesn't harm anyone. It actually increases our audiences. So I think that the work has to, you know, come from all the corners, all the sides, and it has to be a group effort, not just putting the burden on the educator. But yeah, that would be my wish for the future of the early music field. So then we don't get these comments, or you are the, you know, we don't get exoticized in the stage or tokenized in the stage either. But it will be a normal, because our society is as colorful as, you know, as it can get, and our stages are not like that yet. But the idea is that we start working now from the ground up in the educational system, so then this can change in a couple of years or decades, hopefully. Thank you so much, Sallynee and Karin. I want to open the floor for questions. If our audience has some, I was not able to see any in our comment section. But as they show up, I just want to mention for the folks that are joining us tonight that we will have another webinar. And please join us on Saturday, February 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So then we can attend the Recent Studies in Applied Artistic Research webinar presented by Catherine Cook and students of the Royal Conservatory of The Hague. Thank you so much, David. Any other comments or final comments from you, Sallynee or Kyran, as we wait for questions, or maybe we just, you know, in this conversation among the three of us? Any thoughts?
I'm trying to remember. I had something after you were you had just spoken. Hold on. Let me try to get it back to me.
We have a question from David McCormick. How can EMA help support K-12 educational initiatives?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kyran. Oh, okay, I'll go. I think that one thing that I would love to see is actually one place where we can gather resources for educators in the K through 12 system. And I know that a lot of music teachers do have experience in incorporating different musical traditions into their curriculum. So perhaps having something that is sort of early music based in that same vein would be a great resource for some teachers out there.
And I was also, well, that's great as well. I was also thinking that even just having like a database and some items that are specifically geared towards people who are presently working within the public school system, trying to see how we can like network, share ideas across the North American continent. I know that, you know, because often we're living in a silo. I want like, you know, have who's the closest early music teacher teaching in the public system to me, No idea. Probably somewhere in New York or Toronto. And then just helping to foster that community and trading off ideas off of each other. And also, again, funding. That would be nice. To support initiatives and help getting some luthiers on the assisting for instruments and taking care of them.
Thank you, Karin. I want to, just comment on Andrew Appel's comment that it is true. Jojo Ma, with his Silk Road project, has been a powerful uniter of non-Western repertoires with roots from Yuri Menuhin and Ravi Shankar. We are not saying that nothing has happened. We are just saying that more can happen, and the idea is just to brainstorm about ways that we can make it better. So then tonight's theme is really, how can we make our stage more diverse, and how can we use it? How can we do it during the educational time of our youth and childhood? That's what we wanted to clarify tonight. Any comment from Sallynee or Karin?
Yes, I agree. And I think that another, again, it's about creating a community. I think something that you mentioned earlier, Karin, really struck a chord with me, in that we are all kind of united in this common purpose, so that it goes, I think there's a lot that we can learn from, some of our colleagues that are very active in this area already, and those of us who would like to do more or to expand our reach. We rely on each other for inspiration and for resources. So yes, I think that's why I think it's important. It's important to establish a community around this common goal, or to broaden the community, I should say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Meg, for your comments. I just wanted to read one saying that, bringing musicians into schools that are underwritten by established ensembles is important, and this is what we are talking tonight, and not just telling the kids, "Hey, Bach is so great, and you need to know it," and get kids participating and playing music when they visit. And this is the part that we wanted to address also tonight, that Bach is great, Vivaldi is great, but we can also, bring them music that they feel that they recognize that they belong to, or that increases their sense of identity and belonging. So then we can open and broaden the scope of early music through that, and we can use early music for that, actually, for fostering this more a broader idea of the repertoire. And exposing them to other historical practices from many other places. So then we create this ongoing process of retroalimentation of their sense of belonging and identity, representation, seeing people that look like them in the stage or look like them, teaching them the music that they may know. And also music that they don't know. But the idea is that we can use early music, or early music, lends itself very well to explore many diverse repertoires and diverse practices, and expose the students to this. So then eventually, we get more students in the upper level choosing to professionalize in historically informed performance. And then eventually we get a more diverse stage in the years to come. Meg says, yeah, you always get great reactions from kids when they are invited to teach the guest artist a song. Gives them power and belonging. Yeah, and those are the themes of tonight. Representation, sense of belonging and identity, and empowerment. Making sure that what we bring them and what we show them makes them feel and say that, yes, I can also do it, and empower them to follow through if they so feel like following a career in music, like the program that Pat Nealis is doing at LaGuardia. Yes. So since we are close to our finishing time, I just wanted to thank you, Sallynee and Kyran, for sharing your ideas, your thoughts tonight. This is an ongoing process, and we are all working towards. We want to work towards and together towards diversifying our field, towards making it more diverse, towards making it more fair and more realistic and more equitable. And so then we can really talk about a global culture, a culture that represents us all, on stage, off stage. And I'm very thankful for your contributions tonight, Sallynee and Karin, because this is the type of conversations we need to have now, and so then we can take actions that will yield tangible results in the future. Thank you, Sallynee and Karin.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you, Karin. It was wonderful.
Thank you to you. So for everyone that joined us tonight, I just wanted to reiterate the invitation for the next webinar on February 18 at 1 p.m. Recent Studies in Applied Artistic Research, given by Catherine Cook. Well, thank you so much for attending this conversation and for joining us tonight. Hopefully we will see you soon, and let's keep the work. Let's keep working towards our idea of early music. And for the ones that join us later, we have very good news about our in-person early music summit this year. So please go ahead and search for the information in our website. Yes, and or read the information on the screen. Thank you so much, David and Early Music America, for having us tonight, and hope you all have a beautiful evening.